And we are live. Hello, hello. For everyone who is just listening on podcast, how this is working, first of all, welcome to the Canadian Commie. How this is working is I am responding to people who are in my YouTube chat that I am recording at the same time. If you would like to join that YouTube chat, please just go to www.thecanadiancommie.com. You can find it in the description. If you would like to donate to the cause, to what we are doing, which is commenting on the decline of Western civilization, please go to patreon.com/thecanadiancommie so that you can do that. It makes me feel good about myself. It makes me feel good about what's going on. We are here. I mean, what a couple of weeks it's been. What a ridiculous time it's been. Today, I am in that space of just complete Zen-style exhaustion, if you know. Today was leg day at the gym, and so I am just tired on that kind of level you can only be at when you do a bunch of squats to just break apart the existential dread that exists inside of your body and spread it throughout your consciousness. Oh, for those of you who are just listening at home, if you hear any snuffling or snurfling or any of that kind of stuff, I have a little pug here. His name is Milo. He's a good little boy. And it is a hot day today, so we're doing everything we can. Peanut Butter Beatrice, good to see you. Good to see you, XD. Good to see each and every one of you. I'm so happy that you guys are here today. Oh, God. Just, the heat is starting to figure me out, and it's just going to be a hot month. So I hope I can make it through. I feel like I have an article here about the heat. No, you know what we're going to be doing today, honestly? What I'm going to be doing today, there's a couple of articles from New Statesman that, on the face of it, appear to be deeply stupid. From the New Statesman, here's the photo of it. For those of you who are just listening, it is a picture of the famous picture of Lenin when he is standing with his finger up and he's lecturing, but they've replaced Lenin with Donald Trump, and they've replaced all of the Russian iconography with American flags and things. And the title is, from the New Statesman, Trump's Permanent Revolution. The right-wing Leninists smashing up the state. This, of course, the phrase permanent revolution is a reference to the work of Trotsky. Trotsky's theory was the theory of permanent revolution. So this framing of Donald Trump and the people around him as Leninists is something that I immediately had to go, probably not. Probably not. So there's two articles here written by Charles Leadbeater and Sophie McBain that I'm going to be reading pretty much straight away to see exactly how stupid this is. My gut tells me, Transylvanian, good to see you. My gut tells me that these articles are going to have absolutely no analysis whatsoever. That they will essentially just be using Lenin or Trotsky or any of this kind of stuff as buzzwords in order to kind of appeal to that mega communist crowd that seems to be gaining a certain amount of steam, which is essentially just, let's take a bunch of libertarian/fascist ideas and put them through a communist language filter. Disconnect them completely from the works of Marx and Lenin, and then pretend as though we're actually interested in communism. XD writes, do they even know, though, or did they just randomly use words they heard something but don't really understand? I mean, we're going to find out. We're going to find out. Yeah, or is it going to be a liberal red scare? Exactly. Nilo, good to see you. CH, good to see you. CH writes, I'm seeing way more communist-themed memes and anime snapshots mostly, and waiting for communist cosplay and remakes of Soviet films. Yeah, we'll see. Transylvanian writes, idiocy. If anyone has taken inspiration from the idea of permanent revolution, it's the neocons with their ideological crusade of bringing liberal democracy by force to the whole world. Yeah, it does seem to be like a critique that you could lay towards the concept of permanent revolution. It's like, wasn't Bush? I guess that makes Bush a Trotskyist, right? So I want to get into these articles right away. It's just stupidity on stupidity, right? It just looks stupid on the face of it. I just can't even express to you guys how silly it is that, like, this paper, this magazine, The New Statesman, wants to be taken seriously. It wants to be taken seriously, and yet I'm looking at an article, and there's a picture here of like a cartoonified Stephen Bannon, who is an advisor to the Trump administration, holding the White House, like a miniaturized version of the White House, in his hands, surrounded by flames and fire. And the article headline is, "The Alt-Right Leninist, Steve Bannon, the U.S. President's chief strategist, wants to destroy the state." I guess that makes him a Leninist, right? Oh my god, dude, this is going to be so dumb. CH writes, I wish Putin would just fund a remake of Alexander Nevsky. It's great as is, but we need modern CGI on the battle on the ice. And the Crusaders' flags should look like NATO flags. Bannon sounds appealing with that headline. Yeah, no kidding. Well, the alt-right Leninist. I mean, it's a contradiction, right? It's like saying the super hot ice, right? Peanut Butter Beatrice writes, yes, but don't worry that the Second American Revolution will supposedly be bloodless unless we leftists insist otherwise, according to the Heritage Foundation. Yeah, exactly. As long as we're willing to just bend the knee and capitulate and just do what we're told, right, then everything will be totally fine. Right? Obey. Just obey. Compton, good to see you. Transylvanian writes, it's not a coincidence that a lot of the 1990s liberal interventionists used to be Trotskyists during the first Cold War. I mean, but imagine believing that, like, the United States is enacting a permanent revolution. Like, I guess it ties in with that whole victimhood culture that exists all throughout conservatism, where they believe they're these big victims, even though they're the leaders of the entire world, basically. All right, here we go into this article. The alt-right Leninist, Steve Bannon, the U.S. President's chief strategist, wants to destroy the state, by very serious writer Sophie McBain. In 2013 and 2014, Steve Bannon organized The Uninvited, an event on the fringes of the Conservative Political Action Conference, which gave a platform to right-wing thinkers deemed too extreme for the largest annual gathering of American conservatives. But on the 23rd of February of this year, President Donald Trump's chief strategist took to the CPAC stage in his trademark uniform of an open-necked shirt, boxy jacket, and rumpled chinos, and greeted the audience with the self-satisfied swagger of a game show host. Having surveyed the room with a smile, he quickly revealed a flash of malice. "Is that the opposition party back there?" he asked, gesturing towards the press corps, before jutting out his chin and nodding his head, like a brawler preparing to exchange blows. Bannon, a 63-year-old former naval officer, Goldman Sachs banker, and propagandist filmmaker who owes his fortune to an early investment in the hit comedy Seinfeld, has rarely spoken in public since he joined Trump's inner team. But on this occasion, he was expansive. He hailed the president for ushering in a new political order and described the U.S. withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal as one of the most pivotal moments in modern American history. Asked to list the new administration's priorities, he cited 3 lines of work. First, the protection of national security and sovereignty. Second, the promotion of economic nationalism by renegotiating U.S. trade deals. And third, the deconstruction of the administrative state. The crowd applauded. Bannon usually outlines his end goal using less bureaucratic language, but the message is unchanged. He has described himself as a Leninist who shares with the Bolshevik leader a desire to destroy the state. I want to bring everything crashing down and destroy all of today's establishment, he told the historian Ronald Radish in 2013. Bannon has since said he does not recall their conversation. Described by one ally as a walking bibliography, Bannon is fiercely intelligent and ruthlessly ambitious, and believes that America is facing an existential crisis that can be averted only through radical action. He was one of the most widely anticipated speakers at CPAC this year, and, by many accounts, is the chief manipulator and mastermind behind the Trump presidency. Yet, he is resolutely anti-conservative. Bannon wants to break things. I mean, I guess it depends on what it is you're trying to conserve, right? Like, if you're trying to conserve the white power structure, right? If you're trying to conserve the patriarchy, for example, then breaking all of the gains that have been made is the conservative thing to do. Last August, he took leave from Breitbart, the provocative far-right news organization he began leading in 2012, to become the chief executive of the Trump campaign. Bannon's influence has grown since then. On the 28th of January, 8 days after Trump's inauguration, the president gave him a full seat on the Principals Committee of the National Security Council, a body made up of senior military officials and top policymakers that discusses the most pressing foreign policy issues. Although presidential aides have occasionally attended NSC meetings in the past, many see Bannon's formal presence as demonstrating an unprecedented politicization of national security decisions and an alarming rise to power of a man with no previous experience of government. In an editorial following his appointment to the NSC, the New York Times suggested that Bannon was positioning himself as de facto president and expressed concern about his penchant for blowing things up. A week later, the paper published an investigation alleging that Trump was angry that he had not been fully briefed before he signed the executive order, granting Bannon this exceptional access. The suggestion that Bannon may be taking advantage of the president's short attention span and thin policy knowledge to serve his own interests is not far-fetched. Trump is a blunt instrument for us, Bannon told Vanity Fair last year, seemingly referring to American nationalists. I don't know whether he really gets it or not. I wonder if this article's gonna, talk about Lenin. What do you guys think? The premise of the article is that Bannon is a Leninist, right? And they've got him, saying it one time. But, does Bannon know anything about Lenin? Does this author know anything about Lenin's theories? I'm straight up reading a book about Lenin right now, and I can tell you pretty cleanly that Steve Bannon, probably not a Leninist, right? Probably doesn't actually believe in the cause. Yeah, smells like clickbait. This is kind of what I'm saying, Peanut Butter Beatrice. Why I think it's important to go through this is to really show, how the narrative and the discourse is shifting to accommodate this rising mega communism and mega communist movement that seems to exist within the Republican Party. And that there are figures who we're beginning to see are somewhat disingenuous or going to be unhelpful moving forward, who seem to profess this idea of class-based organization and want to move forward with communist language, but seem to be throwing their chips in with people who are going to be actively abandoning that cause. Transylvanian writes, it's telling that the media is more worried about the idea of the fake populist right wing disrupting the liberal status quo and threatening bourgeois state institutions than they are with the vicious, fascistic anti-worker policies that have already been implemented under Democrats and Republicans alike. Yeah, it's that kind of classic thing that I've really been noticing more and more, and it's getting more and more obvious, which is that Americans don't seem to care about what's real. They only care about what's performative and what looks good performatively. That the reason why Americans are so kind of disgusted with Trump is not because of his policies, but because of how he is presented. That he is this boorish, bullyish, grab her by the pussy kind of a guy that embarrasses them. And that's it. It's not because of any of his policies. It's not because of any of his ideas. It's not because of any of his thoughts, right? Because Americans don't actually know anything about Trump's ideas or thoughts or any of that kind of stuff. And the media doesn't report on any of that. It's all just the most vapid, most surface level, performative bullshit that people seem to care about. And when you have an entire culture and an entire intelligentsia, an entire governing class that are moving forward on those principles, then you can basically just say what you like. Like, everything is just a buzzword. So Steve Bannon is a Leninist. Why is Steve Bannon a Leninist? Because he's said, I don't like the state. Well, there are a lot of ideologies that say they don't like the state. Like, could it possibly be that Steve Bannon has no fucking idea what he's talking about? Could that possibly be the case? No. But to point that out, to actually say aloud, Steve Bannon has no fucking idea what he's talking about, that means that you actually have to know something about the subject. And no American journalist anywhere knows anything about any communist anywhere, right? These people are the most illiterate people possible. These people know nothing whatsoever. They've never read even one tiny scrap of Marx, let alone Lenin, and they don't know the history of the Russian Revolution. They don't know anything. And so for them to actually say, I don't know about this Bannon being a Leninist, or them to actually say, yeah, Bannon is a Leninist, it would mean that they would have to know something about Lenin, and they don't. Right? That's what I'm getting from this article, and I think that's what I'm going to get from the next one, too. Like, these guys are just using this stuff as buzzwords, because that's all it's ever been for them. They don't know anything about the subject. Continuing the article, former colleagues have described Bannon as a bully, a nasty human being, and a monster. And we're all supposed to be like, yeah, just like Lenin. That's right. Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, has repeatedly slammed him as a white supremacist. Well, if Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, have repeatedly slammed him as a white supremacist, boy, do I ever take that seriously. Whatever Nancy Pelosi says on a subject. Just for clarity, Steve Bannon is a white supremacist. And he has faced accusations of anti-Semitism, misogyny, and Islamophobia. From an office at the White House that he calls the War Room, he has driven, reporters say, some of Trump's most contentious policy decisions, such as the ban on citizens of 7 predominantly Muslim countries from entering the United States, subsequently reduced to 6. Good job, Democrats. You did it. You reduced it to 6. He's also reported to have been one of the authors of Trump's dystopian inauguration address, with its vision of American carnage. Described in a 2015 Bloomberg Businessweek profile as the most dangerous political operative in America, Bannon delights in his evil overlord persona. Darkness is good, he told The Hollywood Reporter in November. Dick Cheney, Darth Vader, Satan. That's power. It only helps us when they get it wrong, when they're blind to who we are and what we're doing. Right? Yeah, just like Satan, just like Lenin, right? We don't need to know anything. Stephen K. Bannon. Oh, now we're going to launch into a history of Bannon, apparently. Stephen K. Bannon was born in 1953 to a blue-collar Irish Catholic Democrat voting family in Richmond, a city of just over 230,000 people in the southern state of Virginia. His father, Marty Bannon, started out repairing telephone lines for AT&T and eventually moved into management. Bannon was the middle of 5 children and attended the all-boys Benedictine High School, now Benedictine College Preparatory, a Catholic military-type institution owned and run by the monastic order. The headmaster and some of his teachers were Benedictine monks. The pupils or cadets wore military tags and were known by their surname only. Sounds very traumatic. Just sounds like an extremely traumatic life that Bannon grew up with. Dude, there are people being paid to write this stuff. There's people who are like literally paid to sit down and write these kinds of articles. This just very deeply unimpressive, like we opened up a Wikipedia article level research. Who's Steve Bannon? Wikipedia said. It was a very traditional education, if you will, and definitely a very conservative school. I remember when we did mock elections, they'd be 90% for the Republicans, John Pudner, who also attended Benedictine High School, told me. Pudner now leads Take Back Our Republic, a group that aims to break the influence of big donors on campaign financing, and he has worked with Bannon on several occasions, serving at one point as the launch sports editor for Breitbart. He believes their schooling helped shape the contours of Bannon's worldview, a commitment to small government and conventional family values. Conventional family values. White supremacy. Come on. Conventional family values. It's the patriarchy. Like that. Like I don't know why we're all just supposed to buy into this idea that, like, yeah, the best way to run everything is with the free market, right? Small government, just no regulation whatsoever, no rules whatsoever, right? But dad is in control, right? Like this is like one of these hysterical contradictions that exists within this ethos, right? It's all supposed to be dad controls everything. Because if the government was to have any amount of control, that means that, like, mom could actually have a say, right? And you don't want mom to have a say. Bannon maintained a close relationship with his alma mater. He served for a while on its board of trustees, and in 2011 he joined a campaign, together with Pudner, to prevent the school from relocating from the diverse inner city to Richmond's wealthy all-white suburbs. Pudner says they were motivated by a sense of Catholic mission. That's part of what we understood our Catholicism to be. That you weren't just kind of off in an elite spot. You mingle. You convey ideas. But you're also part of the community, Pudner said. I love it. He's just like saying out loud, we understood our Catholic mission was to be the elite. Right? We're obviously the better. Like, come on, we're rich and white. We're obviously better. But it's good for us to be in the community and mingling, right? And conveying ideas, to the poor blacks. They lost the campaign, but not, Pudner was quick to point out, without claiming a few scalps. Three county supervisors who supported the move lost their seats in that year's election. Vicious assault, decimation, claiming a few scalps. These people are ghouls, dude. Like, straight up. This is just like some ghoulish language. We claimed some scalps. Yeah. Bannon studied urban affairs at Virginia Tech University and was elected president of its Student Government Association in 1975. On graduating, he joined the Navy. Though he was not directly involved in the operation, he was serving as a junior officer aboard the destroyer USS Paul F. Foster in the 1980s when U.S. forces launched a failed attempt to rescue 52 people held hostage at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. I wasn't political until I got into the service and saw how badly Jimmy Carter effed things up. I became a huge Reagan admirer. Still am. Leninist, though. Right? Definitely a Leninist. Yeah. It's absolutely canon, you guys. It's absolutely the case. Right? 100% total truth. Cannot be falsified. That Lenin would have absolutely loved Ronald Reagan. That Vladimir Lenin would have taken a look at Ronald Reagan and said, absolutely, this guy here upholds the core ideas of Bolshevism, the core ideas of communism. He would have written absolutely no criticism whatsoever of Ronald Reagan. He would have just, talked about Ronald Reagan and then been like, no notes, King. Well done, Ronald Reagan, right? So when Steve Bannon says that he's a Leninist, that means that he's a very serious intellectual person who definitely knows what he's talking about and isn't just a total rubish loser who's been traumatized by militant Catholicist systems. And he's never actually decompacted any of that. He's never actually deconstructed his upbringing. And so he's just this extremely traumatized neoliberal hack walking around talking about how awesome it would be to blow up the state when what he really means is let's get rid of all the wokeness. Right? Any institution that makes it so that the gays can have sex with one another. Jesus doesn't care for that. After Ronald Reagan's election that year, Bannon worked in naval operations at the Pentagon while taking an MA in National Security Studies at Georgetown University. The dude is literally raised to be a brain-dead militant. That's straight up what he's raised to be. Right? He comes up in a Catholic school that is like a military academy, goes to works for naval operations in the Pentagon, and then takes a master in national security studies at Georgetown University. At what point is this guy actually standing up and doing any actual analysis of capitalism, an analysis of the state, an analysis of the Pentagon, of the State Department, of the presidency, of the Congress? Where is his analysis of the United States imperialist system, right? How does Stephen Bannon define the state? How does he define the state? What's the state to Bannon? In 1983, he made the first of many career changes and enrolled at Harvard Business School. Yes, the place that rich people go when they have no fucking idea what to do. When they have no vision, when they have no thoughts, when they don't understand anything about their culture or their civilization. All they know is Harvard Business School will make me rich because money good. I don't worship money, clearly. A classmate from those years told the Boston Globe that Bannon was top 3 in intellectual horsepower in our class. Perhaps the smartest. Yep, the smartest at being dumb. After completing his MBA, he joined Goldman Sachs, but left in 1990 to set up his own investment firm, Bannon & Co., specializing in the media industry. He acquired his stake in Seinfeld in 1993 when the sitcom, centered on the lives of 4 highly strung New Yorkers, was in its 4th series and still drawing relatively small audiences. Within a year, the show became one of the most popular in America. It is not known how large Bannon's stake is, but in 2013, the Financial Times reported that Seinfeld had earned $3.1 billion through syndication in the previous 5 years. He continues to earn royalties today, right? So this is how capitalism works. Some traumatized pro-capitalist loser who had absolutely nothing to do with this television show, just uses the money that his daddy gave him to have a stake in it, and now he's just super rich because of the labor of other people, right? The American dream, becoming rich while doing nothing important whatsoever. The Seinfeld windfall helped fund his career as a filmmaker. Julia Jones, a screenwriter who worked with Bannon on and off for 2 decades, remembers first meeting him at a party in Beverly Hills in 1991. They spoke of his plans to adapt Shakespeare for the big screen. Oh, good for you, bud. Good for you. The work is probably a little beyond you, honestly, but it's probably why it never materialized, right? You have to actually have things like basic like human empathy to kind of get a hold of Shakespeare. Bannon's overgrown hair, pasty complexion, and disheveled clothing recently prompted the comedian Stephen Colbert to describe him as Robert Redford dredged from a river. But in the 1990s, Jones told me, he dressed down, but he was still neat and clean. He was preppy. He was really very attractive. Good-looking, charismatic, and he weighed a lot less. Yeah, I mean, he probably falls into a decline in his later years because he's never unpacked the trauma that he experienced as a young man. They struck up a close friendship. Jones describes him as very, very smart, but not in an obnoxious way, and an avid reader with a keen interest in ancient philosophy and military strategy. He was fun to be around, largely because he had an idea a minute, some quirkier than others. When he called one day to say he had written the opening to a rap adaptation. Hold on. When he called one day to say he had written the opening to a rap adaptation of Shakespeare's Coriolanus set in LA during the 1992 race riots, she agreed to work with him on it. But I need to see that. I need to see that. I need to absolutely see that. Joe, good to see you. Baldy, good to see you. How do I get my hands on this rap adaptation of Shakespeare's Coriolanus? Please tell me how I get a hold of that. Bannon's faith was evidently important to him. At one point, he considered adapting St. Mark's Gospel for the cinema, but the writing partners rarely discussed politics. Jones, who considers herself left of Bernie Sanders, told me that though he expressed the usual GOP views, he usually ignored rather than confronted the opinions of liberals he worked with. The most overtly political project Jones and Bannon co-wrote was his directorial debut, In the Face of Evil, Reagan's War in Word and Deed, released in 2004. The trailer splices Reagan's A Time for Choosing speech with footage from the Second World War, communist-era Russia, and the 9/11 attacks, intercut with pseudo-religious captions. In mankind's bloodiest and most barbaric century came a man with a vision, an outsider, a radical with extremist views of how to confront evil. Evil is powerless if the good are unafraid. Yeah, well-known, highly religious fundamentalist Lenin would absolutely have no notes for this. Jones says the Reagan documentary really launched Steve into a world of Washington politics. Before that, he was a wannabe filmmaker in Hollywood. It was at an early screening of In the Face of Evil that he first met Andrew Breitbart, the founder of the eponymous news group. He later began making films with David Bowie, who leads the conservative advocacy group Citizens United. Bowie introduced Bannon to Donald Trump in 2011, when Trump was contemplating running for the Republican presidential ticket. Bowie and Bannon worked together on hagiographic documentaries of the Tea Party leaders Sarah Palin and Michael Bachmann, as well as Generation Zero, which attributed the 2007 financial crash to a failure of culture. And Occupy Unmasked, which promised to tell the true story of the radicals behind the Occupy movement. So these guys are Goebbels. Like this article is trying to convince you that this is what Lenin would have done. This is Lenin. That's what this is. Alt-right Leninism. It's just straight Goebbels. A literal propagandist. Like a guy who was raised in a traumatized environment, who never deconstructed his youth, who always believes in the Reagan-esque vision of the world, making just absolute trash dreck propaganda that even Goebbels would probably look at and be like, we could do better than this. Like, what are we doing here? Come on. Attributing the 2007 financial crash to a failure of culture is dumb. That's just something that a dimwit would say. I guess the 2007 financial crash is attributable to a failure of culture if you consider capitalism to be a culture, right? But as opposed to an economic system. Oh my God. It's exactly what Lenin would say, by the way. Just got to point out, right? Hard right Leninist, right? Super strong Leninist Steve Bannon attributing the 2007 financial collapse to a failure of culture. That's exactly what Lenin would have said. For sure. Lenin absolutely would not have pointed out that this is the inevitable result of finance capital, right? And that capitalism eats its own tail, right? He definitely would not have made these observations, as he did multiple times throughout his entire career. No. Failure of culture. Steve Bannon, well-known Leninist. People have said I'm like Leni Riefenstahl, Bannon told the Wall Street Journal in 2007, adding that he was a student of the Nazi propagandist, as well as the Soviet director Sergei Eisenstein, and the liberal documentary maker Michael Moore. You guys, what am I reading? What am I reading, dude? This guy looks so traumatized. Helena Bertha Amelie Leni Riefenstahl was a German film director, photographer, and actress known for producing Nazi propaganda. Dude, I was saying the Goebbels thing kind of tongue-in-cheek. Literally the very next paragraph, this guy is like, yeah, people say I'm a lot like this Nazi propagandist. I'm a student of Nazi propaganda, you know? I'm well versed. I've definitely studied Nazi propaganda so that I can make Nazi level propaganda for myself. Bro, he just says it out loud. And then he's like, yeah, as well as the Soviet director, Sergei Eisenstein, because that's the same. And don't forget about Michael Moore, because Michael Moore is exactly the same. Ugh. In his new incarnation as crusading filmmaker, he started to dress differently. Jones recalls how while he was working on The Undefeated, his 2011 film about Sarah Palin, I looked up one day and I couldn't tell him from Michael Moore. Yeah, like, the guy probably is just like falling into a massive depression. Can't stop eating. Imagine making a film about Sarah Palin. Dude. Horrible admission about myself, everybody. Here it comes. You guys are going to lose all your respect for me when I say this. But I don't care. I think that Sarah Palin is a fine-looking lady. I would take Sarah Palin out for a nice dinner. You bet I would. Crazy and kooky as a banana. Although she did pull one over, she did this amazing, just absolutely... It was such a scheme. It was such a con that I had to respect it. You know what I mean? So after her like failed bid to be the vice president underneath McCain, there's all this buzz around her. Is she gonna run for president? Right? Is she gonna run for president? And so what she does is she buys a bus, paints it with like all of this like Constitution, we the people, America first kind of iconography. I remember on the side of the bus there's like a Constitution on the side of it. And she follows the presidential campaign around, right, in her bus. And there's a lead up, there's a cutoff moment. There's a moment where you have to declare that you're actually running in the race. But the presidential campaign is, of course, running before this. And so she's in this bus, going from stop to stop, following the presidential campaign around, and people are giving her money because they assume that she's running for president. Right? She's going around with this bus, around with the presidential campaign. Well, the day of the announcement that you have to announce whether or not you're actually running for president comes, she doesn't announce, and then she just stops following the campaign around. People say that she made something like $600,000 doing that. There's people giving her donations. And she just says, like, well, I never said I was going to run for president. People were just giving me money. Right? I didn't say I was a presidential candidate. And so, like, the legal system looks at this and they're just like, yeah. Like, she was just there. And people just assumed, and they just gave her money for just being there. And she made like $600,000 doing it. And I remember reading that, thinking to myself, God damn it, Sarah. Everybody thought that you were a dumbass. Everybody thought that you were just a dumbass dullard. And then you pulled this shit. I can't hate it, Sarah. It makes me respect her. It makes me like her more somehow. That, like, she just pulled this, like, enormous... Someone should make a movie about that. That's the plot of a movie right there. Just this, like, woman who gains enough notoriety so that she is thought of to be a presidential candidate, never actually declares, but just does the one thing that everybody would assume would mean she is a presidential candidate, and gets like almost $1 million given to her in donations before just bouncing. I love it. I love it. It makes me like her. It makes me like her. I would, if I ever met her, I would be like, hey, well done on that, by the way. It's like a heist. That's how I would film it. If I was making that movie, I would film it as a heist movie. Just like a heist film where she gets away with it clean. Just like nobody can do anything about it. Because she didn't break any laws. I didn't say I was running for president. People just gave me money. Nilo writes, have you heard of the Bituation Room podcast? I forget the host. She did a Fash or Smash segment today. Which of these ghouls are too fascist to fuck? Fash or Smash? I'm glad to hear that that's picking up. All right, continuing with this article. I'm having a good time reading this article, dude. This is ridiculous. After the 11 September 2001 attacks, Bannon's worldview grew darker. Darker than Nazism. Darker than Nazi propaganda, you guys. He has consistently argued that Islam is at odds with Western values and civilization. I mean, the West literally carpet bombs Islam. So I guess that's technically true. Like, I would argue that Western values and civilization are against, like, humanity, right? Like, we're constantly destroying everything we touch. We're literally polluting the environment so badly that the earth itself is turning against us. So I suppose that that's correct, that Western values is at odds with Islam, because Western civilization, if such a thing exists, is against basic human values and basic, like, humanity. Like, not even values, just basic survival. Just basic, do you want to live on the planet? Well, the West says no. In a speech delivered to a conference at the Vatican in 2014, he argued that the West is at the beginning stages of a global war against Islamic fascism. Who? What possible organization could represent even the remotest of threats? What possible threat could any of these countries, right? Iran is like the most advanced one right now. Saudi Arabia, right? They don't have a fucking navy. They don't have an air force. What are you fucking talking about? Who are these Islamic fascists? What, like a bunch of kooky terrorists that the United States government actively funds? Is that what you're talking about, Bannon? Real Leninist here. This is some real Leninist level analysis that we're getting from Stephen Bannon right here. And of course, he's using the phrase popularized by Christopher Hitchens, right? Super smart guy. Definitely not just a secular fundamentalist worshiping the state and worshiping money like the rest of the West. The big scary thing that we need to be worried about is small groups of Islamic terrorists that the West funds and not the United States State Department, right? Not the CIA. That's definitely not the case. He sees the whole religion and not just its violent fringes as a threat. Yeah, definitely not an insane lunatic, right? Definitely, just this guy's just a fascist, right? Like, he's not an alt-right Leninist. He's just a fascist. If you look back at the long history of the Judeo-Christian West's struggle against Islam, oh man, I believe that our forefathers kept their stance, and I think they did the right thing. I think they kept it out of the world, he said. Does this guy not know about the, like, Crusades? Does Steve Bannon not actually know who, like, what the Crusades were? Where a bunch of Christians thought to themselves, hey, let's just launch a holy war against Islam in order to, like, steal resources and shit. And this guy's standing here being like, we were definitely the good guys during, you know, the Crusades. Nobody looks at the Crusaders in a dim light. Yeah, Crusaders. That's definitely who we should be. I know that when I was growing up, I would go to organizations called, like, Campus Crusade for Christ and things like this. What a normal society we are. Completely normal. Pudner, his friend from Richmond, says Bannon first expressed an interest in entering politics after the 2007-2008 financial crisis, which he said was a failure of culture, right? Not an economic failure, right? As Lenin would have definitely noticed, but a cultural failure. That cultural failure is, of course, those darkies bought too many houses. And made all the whites pay for it. Bannon's father, who is in his 90s and with whom Bannon is very close, lost almost all his life savings as the stock market crashed. He felt like, my dad's working class, worked his whole life, put money away to save up, and now he has no money to do anything. And all my old friends at Goldman Sachs are figuring out how all the rich people are not hurt in this recession, Pudner told me. That was his first motivation, when he just said, you know something? I'm going to have to get into politics because something's wrong here. So, literally, Bannon watches his dad get wiped out, and instead of saying, hey, it's these rich cocksuckers that robbed my father, which is what it was, he goes, must be a cultural issue. Bannon's anger at the financial elite did not forestall his profound hatred for the Occupy movement. The more I'm learning about this guy, the more I'm saying he's just traumatized. He has no analysis. He's flailing. He doesn't know where to point or who to blame. He is a ball of contradictions in and of himself. He doesn't know why he hates the things he hates. He doesn't know why he feels the way he feels about things. He just knows that he feels the way he feels about those things and then attempts to post-rationalize them after the fact, right? He's trying to square a circle that cannot be squared. While promoting Occupy Unmasked, he said with characteristic crudeness that the film would leave viewers wanting to go home and shower because you've just spent an hour and 15 minutes with the greasiest, dirtiest people you will ever see. He is also no champion of the poor. Real Leninist, right? Lenin, consistently outspoken about how we should help the poor and the working class. Steve Bannon, though, absolutely a Leninist. The focus of his concern is those in the middle, who he believes are hardest hit in an economy that provides socialism for the very poor and the wealthy and a brutal form of capitalism for everybody else. Steve Bannon is desperately out of touch with reality. Like, demented. Absolutely demented if he thinks that the very poor are receiving socialism. Like, what the fuck kind of dog shit analysis is this, Steve Bannon? Like, absolute total trash dog shit. Anybody who has ever said that this guy is intelligent is the dumbest person you've ever met in the world. Like, if you talk like this, and your eyes are crossed, and you're like, oh, no, oh, goodness me, your whole life, and you're like, oh, that guy's super smart. Right? Like, in the movie Idiocracy, everybody thought the normal guy was super smart. He argues that the United States faces a threat to its existence. That's true. Self-inflicted wounds all the way down. Not only because of its financial vulnerability, but also because capitalism has become separated from its Judeo-Christian roots. This guy, dude, is absolutely traumatized. Oh my god, dude. What I'm looking at is just a disaster. Just an absolute disaster brain, like basket case. Just a basket case of a person. I have said repeatedly, right, that conservatives have a built-in contradiction in their worldview, right? That the contradiction that exists within the mind of the conservative man is the struggle on how to be a good person, how to be a good Christian, and how to be a good capitalist. And you can only pick two. There's no such thing as a good person who's a good Christian who's a good capitalist. And if you're a good person who is also a good capitalist, right, you'll only kind of moderately exploit the people around you. You'll actually care about, like, the people who are operating in your business, right? You're operating within the structure of capitalism that is itself a psychotic demon, but you are not a psychotic demon. You think about the guys that run the Arizona Tea Company, right? Inflation's skyrocketing in the roof, through the roof. Can of Arizona iced tea, 99 cents. Somebody even put a mic in front of the guy's face and was like, "Why is your tea still as cheap as it is?" And he went, "I'm still making money. Everything's completely fine. The people that work for me are doing very well. Right? I don't need to raise prices. Everything's fine." And they're like, "Don't you want more money?" And he's like, "No, I'm fine." Like, good person, good capitalist, right? Providing a product, doing all the things that they say capitalism should be doing without going that next level of being like, I could enslave everybody and make money out of everything, right? And if you want to be a good person and be a good Christian, well, that means denouncing the system of capitalism completely, you know, the way Jesus Christ would have. Fun fact, by the way, here's a quote from the Pope. Hold on, I've got it. Oh no, did I just put it in the Discord? I'm the most organized person alive. From Pope Francis. Yes, I am a communist, and so too is Jesus. Suck it, Christian capitalists. Suck it. So if you want to be a good person and be a good Christian, here you go, right? You're a communist. That's what you do. You denounce the system of capital, right? And you get away from it as fast as you possibly can. Now, if you want to be a good Christian and you want to be a good capitalist, you cannot be a good person. You have to be a psychotic mass murdering lunatic. Like, drum roll, Steve Bannon. He argues that the United States faces a threat to its existence not only because of its financial vulnerability, but also because capitalism has become separated from its Judeo-Christian roots. Capitalism was never once rooted in Judeo-Christianity, like never once. That the way capitalism arrived, like what a Leninist this guy is, the way capitalism appears in the world is that merchants and manufacturers begin to make more money and have more wealth and power and position than the monarchs. And so they're able to challenge and oppose the power of the monarchies because the capitalists, the merchants and manufacturers, have more power and position in the society than the kings and the queens and the princes and the dukes and the courts. And this happens through a variety of different mechanisms, but that is completely economic. At no point was the system of capital ever connected to Judeo-Christianity. That it may have sprung from cultures that consider themselves to be Judeo-Christian, but the fact that the entire time the people within the Judeo-Christian like churches have been denouncing the system of capital the entire fucking time should tell you something, Steve Bannon. But Steve Bannon is just a traumatized little boy that hasn't grown up. The solution he proposes is a populist middle-class revolt against the Democratic Party and the apparatus on the left, the liberals, which includes the mainstream media and the education system, as well as the Republican leadership, which is, incidentally, what we're seeing, right? That's basically what is happening. In a speech to the Liberty Restoration Foundation in 2011, Bannon described the challenge facing post-crash America as the Great Fourth Turning in American history. The Fourth Turning is a 1997 book by William Strauss and Neil Howe, which argues that history works in 80 to 100-year cycles, each culminating in a 2-decade turning, or crisis, in which the old civic order is replaced by a new one. Around the year 2005, a sudden spark will catalyze a crisis mode. Remnants of the old social order will disintegrate. Political and economic trust will implode. Real hardship will beset the land, with severe distress that could involve questions of class, race, nation, and empire, the book warns. The result could be war, civil violence, a breakup of the United States, or authoritarianism. Yet Americans will also enter the fourth turning with a unique opportunity to achieve a new greatness as a people. By 2012, Bannon had transformed himself again, this time from filmmaker to far-right media chief. 2 years earlier, he had begun offering free office space to Andrew Breitbart for his pugnacious news site. When Breitbart died of heart failure at the age of 43 in March 2012, Bannon, already a board member of the Breitbart Group, was appointed chairman. Under his leadership, Breitbart.com pursued an anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim agenda and ran such incendiary headlines as, "Would you rather your child had feminism or cancer?" That's so stupid. Like, that's so... Can you imagine actually saying, I would rather my child had cancer than feminism? Bro, like, what the fuck? Bannon has proudly declared that the website is the platform for the alt-right. This term covers a broad spectrum of far-right ideologies that share a core belief that white identity is under attack. So, I don't know why we're using the term alt-right. It's fascism, right? Like, pretty much fascism just flirting with Nazism, right? Mark Podek, a senior fellow at the Southern Poverty Law Center, a civil rights group, told me that alt-right is best thought of, in essence, as a whitewashing rebranding of old-fashioned white supremacy or white nationalism. Among the writers Bannon championed was Milo Yiannopoulos, banned from Twitter in 2016 for racially abusing the actress Leslie Jones and encouraging his followers to do the same, and who most recently made headlines for appearing to condone pedophilia. Isn't it always awesome how these far-right guys are all pedophiles in the end of it all? We have a very foolish comment over on Twitch that I just have to read because it can't be serious. I support the military-industrial complex, and I believe Lockheed Martin is our savior. Many of Bannon's former colleagues, including some of his fiercest critics, have denied that he is a racist or anti-Semitic. Yet he appears, at the very least, untroubled by the prejudices of those who write for Breitbart and comprise much of its readership. In July 2016, speaking to the progressive magazine Mother Jones, he conceded that some white nationalists, anti-Semites, and homophobes were attracted to the alt-right, but argued that the American left also attracts certain elements. Yeah, what elements? What elements? You mean black people? You mean people of color? You mean like homosexuals? Right? Certain elements. What elements? Ex-staffers at Breitbart have accused Bannon of exerting dictatorial control over the site's content, using it to curry favor with friends and take down enemies, and ordering a change to articles he deemed not vitriolic enough. Everyone who works with Steve in a position of subordination is scared shitless of him, because he's a bully, and he yells at people, and he harasses people, and he's a nasty human being. Ben Shapiro, a former Breitbart editor-at-large, told me. If Ben Shapiro says that you're a nasty human being, yikes. Right? Like, Ben Shapiro is like a creepy, weird little Nazi. If he's saying that Breitbart is a nasty human being, or that Bannon, rather, is a nasty human being. In March 2016, several staff members, including Shapiro, left Breitbart. The trigger was the organization's refusal to stand by one of its reporters, Michelle Fields, after she was allegedly assaulted by Trump's then campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski. But many also objected to Bannon's transforming Breitbart into a propaganda outlet. Because, yeah, what Shapiro is doing is absolutely not fucking propaganda, right? And a whorehouse for Trump, as Shapiro put it. Bannon's media strategy was two-pronged. In 2012, as he built a growing audience on the fringe right through Breitbart, he co-founded the Government Accountability Institute, a non-profit organization whose sophisticated investigations into subjects such as the Clintons' finances were picked up by the wider media. In November 2015, Bannon became the founding host of the Breitbart News Daily radio show. Donald Trump was a repeat guest. Here, the frequently offensive Bannon showed himself to be also an effective sycophant. I know you're a student of military history, he told the candidate who professed to have too little time to read books. The pair enjoyed an easy rapport, Bannon asking leading questions and pontificating on Trump's wealth, the size of his rallies, his skill as a deal maker. The way he gets in people's ears is by telling them that they are the greatest geniuses he has ever met, and he will make them famous and powerful, Shapiro told me. And then he proceeds to give the go-ahead to all of their worst instincts, because if you're the yes man, you never get fired. Yeah, Ben Shapiro is a creepy person. He's just like a deeply, deeply, deeply oh, okay. You're just so sorry. We have somebody on Twitch. I'm not gonna dignify your comments with response, except to say no Nazis, please. So no Nazism. Maybe go grow up, right? Read any book, right? Like literally read anything. I don't know, basic empathy, right? Learn to care and love for your fellow human being. Lunatics like you usually pretend to be Christians, so maybe read the Bible once. Like, actually listen and hear what your Christ actually said one time in your life. Stop listening to the people you've been listening to, because they're obviously frauds. You're a creepy, weird little Nazi. Get the fuck out of here. It was a pleasure to ban you. Bannon often boasts that he was among the first to recognize Trump's political potential. The property tycoon and reality TV star announced his candidacy in June 2015 with a speech in which he pledged to build a wall between Mexico and the United States to keep out immigrant rapists, drug dealers, and other criminals. The idea of somebody running for president, of all things, who talks about essentially ethnic nationalism was a wake-up call, an electrifying event for people like Bannon and, in general, what is called the alt-right, the fascists, says Lawrence Rosenthal, the chair for the Center for Right-Wing Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. Even before Bannon formally joined Trump's campaign, the two men enjoyed a close relationship. Trump consulted Breitbart and other fringe websites for news and echoed their anti-foreigner, America First rhetoric. Man, real Leninist here. I gotta tell you, what I'm seeing is just absolutely everything Lenin stood for sure. Are they even going to try to connect any of this to Leninism? No, right? Like, this is just literally, they got me. They did it. They were like, I know how to get the commies to read about Steve Bannon. Bannon saw in Trump someone who could be a vehicle for realizing at the presidential level those kinds of ideological tenets. While Trump saw in Bannon someone who was very effective at messaging along the lines of what Trump had already understood about nativism, anti-immigrant, that kind of nationalist rhetoric, Rosenthal says, he believes that Bannon reveals the ideological heart of Trumpism. An unnamed former associate described Bannon to Politico as the Rain Man of nationalism because of his speed reading habits. The Politico site reported that he had urged White House staff to read books such as Sun Tzu's Art of War and Nassim Nicholas Taleb's Anti-Fragile, a treatise on how to thrive in an age of chaos and uncertainty. What? Not what is to be done? Or imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism? No. For Leninists, he's sure not recommending people read a lot of Lenin. Right? Public comments made by Bannon show his familiarity with writers who remain obscure, beyond far-right circles. In his 2014 Vatican speech, he cited the work of Julius Evola, whose writings provided inspiration for the Italian fascists. He has repeatedly described the European migrant crisis as mirroring The Camp of the Saints, a 1973 novel by Jean Raspail, in which France and the rest of Europe are overrun by dark-skinned, feces-eating, sexually predatory refugees bent on overpowering the white population. However, Bannon may read more widely. Late last year, a New York Times reporter spotted him in an airport poring over the best and the brightest. David Halberstam's account of foreign policy mistakes made by the brilliant young advisors who worked for J.F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. He told the reporter he had asked several people in the Trump administration to read the book, saying, "It's great for seeing how little mistakes early on can lead to big ones later." Dude, you are the mistake. Like, you, Bannon, you're the mistake. Bannon has been divorced 3 times and has 3 daughters, to whom he is reportedly devoted. During the presidential campaign, journalists uncovered police records showing that he was charged with domestic violence during his second marriage. He pleaded not guilty, as well as court records from after their divorce in which his ex-wife alleges that he didn't want their twin daughters going to school with Jews because he, quote, doesn't like Jews. He denies having said this. Generally, however, those close to him say that the self-styled Prince of Darkness is enjoying his time in the spotlight and is thriving under the pressure of his new role. The chief strategist had a glaringly obvious influence on Trump's inaugural address and is reported to have pushed for the administration's hard line on immigration. Under Trump, the White House website no longer mentions climate change, nor does it have a section on LGBT rights. Bannon has described global warming as a manufactured crisis, implying it isn't real. Breitbart similarly dismisses climate change as a hoax and a scam. He has little patience with left-wing identity politics, but is obsessed with right-wing identity politics. On his watch, Breitbart published several articles under the tag Black Crime and stories on immigrant and illegal alien crime before Trump landed on the same theme. He is also reported to have been responsible for some of Trump's more reckless executive orders, such as the so-called Muslim ban, overturned by the courts again this month. His rash approach to policymaking may be a product of his combative personality. Anytime there'd be a sort of controversial move, his first instinct was always, go for it. And that's what blows up in his face, Shapiro told me. Having made the transition from outsider agitator to ultimate political insider, Bannon may find his long-term success depends on an ability to curb his attack dog instincts and to compromise. Yeah, the dude is traumatized, right? He's in a state of fight or flight, and he's choosing. Well, he's not choosing, but he's experiencing fight, right? That if you are in a state of fight or flight, well, you're either going to flight or you're going to fight. And Bannon fights. Bannon once compared himself to Cromwell in the House of Tudors, the history buff perhaps having forgotten that ultimately Thomas Cromwell was executed for treason. The Trump administration having spent its first weeks in near-permanent crisis mode, that boast may yet come to haunt him. I'm so glad that I read this. I know it was an old article. But I don't care. Like, the people running our country are dumb. Just very dumb people who shouldn't be our leaders. Oh my God. Yeah, Peanut Butter Beatrice. I'm sorry, alt-right Leninist is the funniest thing I've heard in a while. Nilo writes, protected like the mafia protects you in exchange for the tax. What I don't like about these religions, among many things, is you can't leave these faiths without people still treating you as if you're still one of them. Ex-Jews are still treated as Jews. Ex-Christians are still treated like Christians. Same with ex-Pacs. It's kind of like a baby in the bathwater thing for the person leaving their in-group and a fox in the henhouse thing with the out-group you might be seeking to join. Aisle crossers are turncoats if you turned on your own people. What makes us think you weren't turned on us? I mean, that's essentially what religion is, right? It's just in-grouping. Like, it's like Christianity shows up on the scene because of the Roman Empire, and it seeks to build a secondary system outside of the imperial system, right? And Christianity helps become a way for larger groups of people to align themselves, right? Bound over on Twitch says, it takes a certain kind of person who wants political power. I think most people, especially intellectuals, don't want that kind of life. I mean, to me, that's the big failing of the American political system, is that basically the type of person who wants to pursue power is just these vapid careerists who don't care about anything other than power for its own sake. And the system isn't designed to curtail them, right? It's not designed to curtail them or put a stamp on them or clamp down on them at all, right? If anything, the system rewards them. So we're seeing the outcome of what that means. We're seeing what it means to have basically a beauty pageant be the deciding factor between whether or not a person gets to be the leader of your country or not. Yeah, Ben Shapiro is a literal genocide enthusiast. That quote is one hell of a pot calling the kettle black situation. Yeah. Ben Shapiro gives me the creeps for real. Yeah, he should. Like, he's a genocidal, kind of creepy, weird little Nazi. One of the major breaks that I had with other podcasters, like Joe Rogan is a big one, right? Listen to Joe Rogan talk about Ben Shapiro, right? Joe Rogan describes Ben Shapiro as a nice guy who is well-meaning that we just have disagreements about. That's how Joe Rogan describes Ben Shapiro. It's like, oh, okay. Like, Rogan has an enormous amount of white privilege in that conversation because it doesn't matter to Joe Rogan if Ben Shapiro hates gay people and wants to round them up, and like none of that matters to Joe Rogan. It won't affect him at all, right? That's why he can say Ben Shapiro's such a nice guy, even though he wants to round up the Jews, or not the Jews, the gays, right? He wants to ban gay marriage. He wants to do all kinds of crazy shit. Just take a look at Project 2025. I've actually got like a really like here are literally some of the policies that come out of Project 2025. Get ready for it, America, because it's coming. End no-fault divorce. Complete ban on abortions without exceptions. Ban contraceptives. Additional tax breaks for corporations and the 1%. Higher taxes for the working class. Elimination of unions and worker protections. Raise the retirement age. Cut Social Security. Cut Medicare. End the Affordable Care Act. Raise prescription drug prices. Eliminate the Department of Education. Use public taxpayer money for private religious schools. Teach Christian religious beliefs in public schools. End free and discounted school lunch programs. End civil rights and DEI protections in government. Ban African American and gender studies in all levels of education. Ban books and curriculum about slavery. End climate protections. Increase Arctic drilling. Deregulate big business and the oil industry. Promote and expedite capital punishment. End marriage equality. Condemn single mothers while promoting only traditional families. Defund the FBI and Homeland Security. Use the military to break up domestic protests. Mass deportation of immigrants and incarceration in camps. End birthright citizenship. Ban Muslims from entering the country. Eliminate federal agencies like the FDA, EPA, NOAA, and more, and then continue to pack the Supreme Court and lower courts with right-wing judges. Yeah, Bound basically hitting it. Yeah, I'm sure Hitler was a nice guy if you visit him in the Eagle's Nest. It all depends on who you are. Exactly. But that's just like exactly it. Like, I fundamentally reject this position that says that it's just all about getting along with a dude, right? It's just all about like, can I have a beer with him? Oh yeah, when we have a chat, we can have like these conversations, right? Like, the reason why Ben Shapiro can hold all of these disgusting positions is because he has the consequences of those positions will never affect him, right? It'll never affect him at all. And it won't affect Joe Rogan either, right? Like, if every gay person got rounded up and sent to a concentration camp, it wouldn't bother Joe Rogan a little bit. Like, maybe it would bother him in a, like, existential kind of a way. He'd be like, that seems to be wrong. But he'll keep doing his podcast. It's completely fine. Peanut Butter Beatrice writes, theocratic fascism in a nutshell. You bet it is. Get ready for it, everybody. Incidentally, like, the Democrats are not standing in the way of any of this. Like, the Democrats are basically just standing there watching it happen through piecemeal reformism. Right? like when the Democrats get control of the House or the Senate or the presidency or any of this kind of stuff, like they did under Obama, it's not like they stand up and say, we're not going to do this stuff. The only time any legislation gets put forward at all to prevent any of this kind of stuff from happening is when there's like millions of people protesting in the streets. And the system of capital has come to realize that all you have to do is ignore those protests, ensure that protesting is the only venue by which people feel they can participate outside of voting. Just ignore them and then pass whatever you like, which is exactly what they're going to do. Transylvanian writes, defund the FBI and Homeland Security is actually a good thing. Yeah, I mean, not if it means increase funding for secret underground. Like, they are going to have their own private organizations. That's the thing, right? Like, I tend to see where you're coming from, Transylvanian, but the truth is that, like, Lockheed Martin will just have their own private organization that does those things on behalf of Lockheed Martin, if they don't already exist. So them defunding the FBI and Homeland Security is like defunding the only organizations that theoretically could stand in the way of these private organizations that the military-industrial complex uses in their place. Bound writes, Project 2025 got brought to mainstream light after Biden's awful debate. It's almost like it's damage control. I mean, the presidential elections are all just vanity projects. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing there. That if the Biden administration felt like it was going to win, or that it had a good chance at winning, it wouldn't have to bring any of that to light. Because they work on behalf of the system of capital, just like the Republicans do. And so they'd prefer people know less about it, right? But Biden still wants to be the president. He's still a vain, vapid, self-involved individual. And so he's showing that just like the Republicans, he's willing to do anything it takes, except actually, assassinate these people. I'm not saying he should. Don't ban me. I'm just saying he has the power to do that now, right? He could just assassinate these people, right? Why doesn't he? Because they're his allies. Fascist level, Hitler level threat, though. Massive fascist Hitler level threat coming that we're definitely opposed to in every way possible, except in the way of actually doing anything about it. Transylvanian writes, oh yeah, no, I agree. In fact, I don't even believe that they do that. I think they just put their own people into these institutions and double down on using them against immigrants and leftists. Yeah. Like, I mean, either way, we're screwed, right? Like, either way, like, a huge clampdown is coming. And there's just like no avoiding it. Somebody wrote, did I hear about the Iranian election results? I did not. I did hear about the France election results, which was actually kind of uplifting. Get fucked, far right. The champagne was on ice at the far right National Rally headquarters, but the celebratory mood swiftly turned to disbelief when the first projected results from Sunday's parliamentary election appeared on TV screens. For days, Marine Le Pen had confidently predicted that her party would triumph with an outright majority, and her protege, Jordan Bardella, would be prime minister. Instead, the National Rally was on course to come third, behind a left-wing alliance and President Emmanuel Macron's centrist bloc. It was undone to a large extent by tactical deal-making between centrist and leftist opponents, who pulled more than 200 candidates from three-way races to avoid splitting the anti-RN vote. The projected result brought to a shuddering halt what had appeared to be a far-right relentless rise in France, carefully engineered by Le Pen, who had sought to clear up her party's image and tap the grievances of voters angry over living costs, strained public services, and immigration. To be sure, Le Pen and her party have suffered disappointment before, most recently her 2022 defeat to Macron in the presidential election, and have managed to bounce back more strongly than before. But for now, the outcome was a bitter pill to swallow. The results are disappointing, and they don't represent what the French people want, said Jocelyn Cousin, 18, who had come to our party HQ expecting a victory party. The RN's momentum had appeared unstoppable after it trounced the centrists in European elections in early June and came first, ahead of the hastily assembled leftist New Popular Front, in the first round of the parliamentary vote on June 30th. Le Pen and Bardella attributed their party setback on Sunday to what Bardella called the disgraceful alliance of anti-RN forces, who he said had caricaturized the party and disrespected its voters. Get fucked. Get totally fucked, far right. Go cry. Go cry in a corner. Eat it. Bound writes, if Biden would sign on to continuing Trump's tax cuts, which he will never do, I'll vote for Trump. My retirement fund will do better, and I'll save 16 to 20K in federal taxes. I mean, I just don't vote. Like, I don't see any purpose to it anymore. Peanut Butter Beatrice says, poor Marine Le Pen was weeping like a toddler who dropped her ice cream cone. Yeah. Eggs D writes, L'Internationale gets louder. Yeah, one can hope. Nilo says, Pezeshkian was the winner. Oh, you're talking about the Iranian. The more center-right neoliberal candidate, from what I can tell. The hardliner lost. The assassination appears to have borne fruit. No, I mean, Iran doesn't want to continue being a theocracy, which is what it is, right? Like, Iran has been run for a long time now by theocrats, militant theocrats. And that made sense during, like, the war on terror, during that period of time. But now there's been a pivot by America. America's been caught up in Ukraine. It's been caught up by its genocide in Gaza. And now it's pivoting to Southeast Asia because it wants to start a war there against China because it's too stupid to figure any other solution out. Because it's run by total dimwits and dullards. Outright, like, neo-Nazi level fascists calling themselves Leninists. Just, like, embarrassing shit. And so a move to a, like, center-right neoliberal is actually a move to the left for Iranians. Right? Oh, yeah, no, Iran is involved in that, to be sure, because they're in the region. But what I'm trying to say is the threat of an Iranian collapse, the threat of an American invasion into Iran is really not on the table anymore. Like, there was a long period of time. You think about, like, the invasion of Iraq, right? The invasion of Afghanistan. Like, if I'm living in Iran, I am saying out loud to everyone around me all the time, we are going to be invaded by America. Like, that's coming. The Americans are coming in here. They're going to roll the tanks in here. That's absolutely happening. 100%. Right? Like, if I was living in Iran, I would just be like, yeah, obviously. Like, anybody here think that's not going to happen? It's obviously going to happen. So we need to put people in power who are willing to fight against this obvious invasion that's obviously coming 100%. We need to put in people who are willing to protect our culture. We need to put in people who are willing to protect our civilization. We need to put in people who are willing to fight and organize an army. Who's that? The militant theocrats. Right? But that's over now. America's not going to invade Iran. They don't have the ability to invade Iran. They don't have the capability to invade Iran anymore. Right? They're too spread out. They've got their resources all over the place. Right? They literally can't invade Iran, even if they wanted to. It would be a failure immediately. Right? The best they can do is, like, pick off one of them every so often. Like, just assassination every so often. And it is true that the Iranian culture is getting the Iranian culture is getting restless with these theocrats. There have been protests. There have been it is just true that there is general restlessness within Iran. And so a move away from the prevailing leadership towards like a center-right neoliberal is a move to the left. It is a move to the left. And it's a move that kind of shows you that Iran is kind of loosening up. That it's no longer willing to just be in high alert, right? We're not going to get invaded immediately. Yeah, Iran needs to heal. The whole region needs to heal. America needs to just get the fuck out of there. Transylvanian writes, I don't put too much weight on the Iranian presidential election. The power of the president is limited. Even with the so-called reformists, the direction of Iran's foreign policy remains the same. And there is no evidence that we know of to indicate that the former president was assassinated. I don't see this as a victory for the imperialists. Iran remains aligned with Russia and the resistance. Yeah, I think that's right. Like, America's goal with Iran is not to, like, get somebody into a position of power, like a Manchurian candidate. That's not what America's goal with Iran is, or ever has been, right? The goal with Iran is to go in there and blow it up and depose their leadership and take the place by force, and then steal their oil. Just like Iraq, just like Afghanistan, just like Somalia, just like Ethiopia. Like, I don't think the goal from the American position has ever been, let's try to get a Manchurian candidate out there. Nilo says, it's a bit like cognitive dissonance for me to talk about neoliberals in the West as right-wing and neoliberals in the East as left-wing. No, I'm not saying that they are left-wing. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they are a little bit more to the left than militant theocrats, right? Like, it's yeah, like that is what I'm not saying that they're suddenly communists. Like, neoliberals are suddenly communists. I'm saying that in comparison to militant theocrats, a neoliberal is further to the left. Not by a ton, not by like an overwhelming amount. They're not like nationalizing the industries. They're not suddenly having a gay rights movement, right? But like they're further to the left than hard right militant theocrats, which again, I want to point out, given the material conditions and the historical conditions of what was going on around Iran at that time, it makes total fucking sense to have a militant theocrat in power. Like, absolute 100% total fucking sense. I think saying otherwise would kind of be bonkers. You want the people who are trying to defend your country and your culture and your civilization and are willing to train, organize, and be militant and think about your country as a militant organization who want to uphold the values of their civilization. What am I describing? I'm describing a militant theocrat. You absolutely want that guy in power during that period of time. The U.S. doesn't want to invade Iran. It's all mountains. Yeah. I mean, I think the U.S. does want to invade Iran. I think they're desperate to destroy Iran. I think the destruction of Iran would actually be really quite a boon to the American empire. I think that they would actually gain a lot by successfully destroying Iran. They just can't be successful at it. Transylvanian writes, I don't agree with that, John. Neoliberals would be to the right of the Islamic Republic's current economic policies. Iran's economics are more leftist than people here in the West understand. Okay. Well, we might be getting, like, the economy on a whole might be the case. Like, all I'm trying to say, you guys, all I'm trying to say is that a neoliberal is further to the left on the political spectrum than a militant theocrat. That's all I'm trying to say. Like, I'm not trying to say Like, I'm not trying to say that American neoliberal economics is further to the left than Iran's economic policies. It's not what I'm trying to say. Like, all I'm trying to say is that a militant theocrat is further to the right than a neoliberal. That's it. That's all I wanted to say. Well, Iran has an interesting and complex history. The like there was a period of time where Iran was where it had a growing communist movement in it, right? Transylvanian says you can call liberals culturally to the left of the Islamic revolutionary regime in terms of social policies, but let's not fall into the trap of pinkwashing imperialism. I'm not trying to pinkwash imperialism. Oh my God. Literally all I said is a militant theocrat is further to the right than a neoliberal. That's it. That's the entirety of the statement, and now I'm pinkwashing imperialism. Okay. So, here is an article from Middle East Eye. Speaking of the Middle East, U.S.-Israel relations. America will stop at nothing to maintain its global hegemony. The explosive return of U.S. bipartisanship in foreign policy signals a great danger, not only to the world, but to ordinary American citizens as well. We got a great picture here of Joe Biden yelling. Old man shakes fist at cloud style. How can we even begin to encapsulate what has happened since the 7th of October, 2023? The unprecedented assault on Gaza that continues only through the support and blessing of the U.S. administration and its Western allies, like the incremental escalations in weapons testings and population control measures that had become a feature of life in Gaza for well over a decade, is unlike anything that has been seen and documented in real time. This includes the Israeli use of AI software, such as Lavender, to increase targeting capacities to levels never before achieved, the wholesale destruction of universities, schools, hospitals, health facilities, water treatment plants, agricultural land, streets, roads, houses, and all necessary infrastructure for civilian life, the withholding of medicine and treatment, the use of famine as a tool of war, and, most recently, the complete enclosure of the Gaza Strip through control of the Rafah crossing and its partial destruction. How do we even catalog these events? The mass graves, the bodies still buried under the rubble, the capture and torture of doctors, medics, and nurses, the targeted assassination of academics and poets, not to mention engineers, journalists, aid workers, ambulance drivers, municipal employees, police, those looking for food or an internet connection, or just children playing. And all this perpetrated by the most technologically advanced military in the world, largely paid for by U.S. taxpayers, with still no possibilities of declaring victory over resistance forces fighting out of tunnels, without an air force, navy, or mechanized units. Those who continue to report or comment on potentially hopeful messages from the U.S. administration are simply buying more time for this destruction and genocide, while ignoring the decades-long evidence of the deep infrastructure that has made all this possible. As the U.S. Congress prepares a bipartisan welcome for internationally recognized war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu yet again, the elaborate ideological gymnastics of the American electorate seem to defy the laws of gravity. Trampling on U.S. law, exposed to the surround sound of a corporate media beholden only to its paymasters, new forms of identity politics have captured all facets of a political life in which politicians have fully abandoned any pretense of representing their constituents, goading those very same constituents to go at each other's throats based on almost everything imaginable except principle. Wellbound, thank you for your donation. 1,000 bits on Twitch. I don't know what that means because I've just started doing this kind of thing on Twitch, but 1,000 seems like a lot. Oh, $10. Thanks, bud. Oh, well, then I'll definitely take it. Why do they just say $10? Why's it got to be this weird little bits thing? The internet. Well, thank you, Bound. I appreciate that. A good opportunity to say like, share, subscribe, hit the bells, hit the whistles, do all of that kind of stuff. You can find me at thecanadiancommie.com. You can donate at patreon.com/thecanadiancommie. Bless each and every one of you for being here. Former free speech advocates and American firsters shred the Constitution while championing Israel's right to defend itself, trampling on U.S. sovereignty and law. Liberals and progressives who cheered on the collusion of all the lettered agencies and the media during the Trump presidency to demonize Russia, along with the ensuing collusion of big government, big tech, and big pharma to censor and decree during the COVID-19 period, are suddenly alarmed that free speech has gone by the board when Palestine is mentioned. Yet many of these same liberals and progressives continue cheering on another term for Genocide Joe, in supposed terror of a second Trump administration. During the 1970s, 80s, and even 90s, various commentators, pundits, analysts, and just plain citizens commonly referred to the U.S. government as ZOG, the Zionist-occupied government. While many identified as conservative, many others didn't, but all were considered conspiracy theorists, that ignominious term originally conjured up by the CIA to discredit anyone questioning either the premises or the conclusions of the Warren Commission, ostensibly set up to examine the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. But few have gone into the details of Kennedy's policies regarding Israel. In his drive towards nuclear non-proliferation, for example, Kennedy clashed head-on with the then Israeli Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, regarding demands to inspect and monitor Israel's nuclear reactor in Dimona. In a letter dated 15th of June 1963, Kennedy wrote, "As I wrote to Mr. Ben-Gurion, this government's commitment to and support of Israel could be seriously jeopardized if it should be thought that we were unable to obtain reliable information on a subject as vital to peace as the question of Israel's effort in the nuclear field." Just 3 days prior to Kennedy's assassination, his ambassador to the UN, Adlai Stevenson, continued advocating in favor of the repatriation of Palestinian refugees, a policy Stephen championed as early as 1961 in clashes with Ben-Gurion, when he had gone so far as to say that Israel needed to make a public declaration accepting the principle of repatriation as enshrined in UN Resolution 194. Light of principle. While there's no way of knowing precisely what Kennedy's policies might have been had he lived, we do know what President Lyndon Johnson's policies were. Support for Israel under Johnson before, during, and after the 1967 war turned completely partisan, initiating a sea change in U.S. political life and culture. Johnson's cover-up of the vicious and unrelenting Israeli attack on the USS Liberty on the 8th of June 1967, in which 34 crew members were killed and 173 wounded, an incident that survivors still seek public redress for, marked a significantly new geopolitical reality. As the U.S. war in Vietnam raged on, Israeli soldiers were depicted as heroic and daring, taking center stage. As American soldiers in Vietnam killed some of their own officers in rebellion against untenable orders, and the anti-war movement among soldiers and veterans grew, they were increasingly depicted as psychopaths and losers. When the draft ended, the U.S. war machine went underground, engaging in 15 years of covert warfare, aware that the U.S. populace had had enough. But the Gulf War, the sanctions on Iraq, the events of the 11th of September 2001, the immediate declaration of the war on terror, followed by invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, further operations in Libya, Syria, and so many other countries, along with complete ideological, political, and military coordination with Israel, fully realized then Senator Joe Biden's 1986 statement as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interests in the region. As generations that experienced the U.S. war in Vietnam slowly disappear, and the actual result of U.S. policies in Iraq and elsewhere have been scrubbed and sanitized, the true effects of government behavior, the banality of evil in Hannah Arendt's momentous formulation, must be forced into the light of principle, away from the changing stripes of political efficacy and the trivialities of identity politics. World wake-up call. The explosive return of U.S. bipartisanship signals a great danger, not only to the world, as Russia, China, and most non-Western nations are more than well aware of, but to U.S. citizenry as well. As Joy Gordon writes, in Invisible War, the United States and the Iraq Sanctions, one of the few books dedicated to the subject, it did not help matters that all three administrations, whether Republican or Democrat, denied the severity of the situation and denied U.S. responsibility for any part of it, even when pressed by members of Congress. But in the end, it made little difference. Congress was, overwhelmingly, simply... What is clear is that left to its own, there was simply no limit on how much harm the U.S. was willing to do to Iraq. The world wake-up call on Gaza has come about almost entirely through the heroic work of Palestinian journalists and Palestinian citizen journalists under siege, on alternative media, through various social media platforms. But how long can they hang on under the present conditions? With information and free speech under a different kind of siege in the West, and politicians and corporate media treating their citizenry as invaders, it seems as if there is no limit on what the U.S. and its allies are willing to do in order to maintain their hegemony. Their citizens and the rest of the world be damned. To think otherwise is a waste of precious energy better used to confront this behemoth on its own terms, rather than those we might hope for. Emil Alcalay is a poet, novelist, translator, essayist, critic, and scholar. He is the author of more than 20 books, including After Jews and Arabs, Memories of Our Future, and the forthcoming Controlled Demolition, a work in 4 books. He is a distinguished professor at Queen's College, CUNY, and the CUNY Graduate Center in New York. Just a phenomenal picture. Just a phenomenal picture. Leon, good to see you. The reason why Zog is foolish is because it lets the American government off the hook. It assumes a corrupting force is the problem and not capitalism itself. I think you're right, Leon. I think that what it does is it is a nationalist's argument, right? That it takes the position that the highest level of politics that exists in the world completely is nationalism. This has become a critique that I've kind of begun formulating. So this is going to be kind of half-baked, but it's kind of what I'm beginning to think about John Mearsheimer, an analyst who I respect a great deal. I think John Mearsheimer's analysis is really good, but his analysis is that at the highest level of politics is an anarchic system and of nation states, and that nationalism is the highest kind of level of politics, and that nations are the highest level of politics. And so with this perspective, you can argue that Israel has invaded American politics, but that fails to recognize that Exactly. It fails to recognize this class analysis, that there is a bourgeois, and that the bourgeois of which, for those of you who might not know what bourgeois means, it's just you're a capitalist. You earn your money not through labor, but through other people's labor, making you a bourgeois. So like a landlord is a good example of this. Bourgeois people are functionally allied to other bourgeois people in other nations. So the Italian bourgeois and the French bourgeois are allies, and they work together. And when these partnerships between bourgeois elements in classes come into disagreement with one another, they take the working class and they throw the working class into wars. And so it isn't that the Israelis have infected the American system. It's that the Israelis have a bourgeois, and that bourgeois is well connected to the bourgeois of American capital, and that they share a collective interest. And that really the Zionists just show up to make sure that their concerns, as the kind of boots on the ground part of the of that collaboration, that their concerns are heard, right? Because the whole goal of Israel is to have a military outpost for America in the Middle East. That's the entirety of the goal. There's literally no other reason for it to exist, unless you really believe in all the kind of religious claptrap and garbage. The thing I've always sort of found interesting about the argument that says Israel should have a homeland, Israel should have its own nation. It's like, oh, okay, well, does it have to literally be right there? Does it have to actually be in this extremely important geopolitical location between Africa and the Middle East? Does it have to be this place that dislocates? Like there isn't another parcel of land anywhere else in the world. There's just literally nowhere else that this project could be happening. So it's so very clearly disingenuous to say that Israel deserves a homeland right here, specifically in this very spot. It's just the most disingenuous bullshit thing. But 5,000 years ago, in the book of Malachi, Herzl died thinking Israel would be in Uganda, right? There's just nowhere this could be. No, it's just straight up got to be a wedge between Africa and the Middle East. It's got to be a launch pad for the Americans to be able to launch into the Middle East, and Africa for that matter. It's just, and I think that's just kind of well understood. That once you get into a class analysis of it, there's no infection whatsoever, right? There's no infection of Zionism in America. They're all on the same page. There's total parity, right? It's not it's not that our government's been taken over by Zionists. Nope, your government is a Zionist government. It hasn't been taken over by Zionists. It always was a Zionist government. Woke CIA drone pilot says, "What's up, John? Hope you're well." Yeah, I hope you're well too out there, my man. I gotta be really honest with you guys. I am just fucking exhausted. Goth Gash says, "I just got here, but are you saying there's not historical context for Jews in and around Jerusalem?" I mean, if you really believe that it matters that 3,000 years ago they were there. Sorry, let's be extraordinarily specific. If your argument actually is that 3,000 years ago there was a group there that called themselves Israelites, and that you actually believe that the people who are doing this genocide now today are actually the descendants of those actual people, then I still don't give a fuck. Like 3,000, who gives a shit? Like 3,000 fucking years ago, who cares? Like what? So Goth Gash could. Oh, I don't think that matters at all. I don't care about any of that shit. So what would be the historical context for Jews in and around Jerusalem? But that's what I'm asking you now. What is the historical context for Jews in and around Israel? Like, why should Israel be there? What's the historical context for it? Oh, dude, I did leg day today. I'm going to talk about myself for just a moment. I did leg day today. Boy, howdy, you guys. Did it... boy, howdy. Did it take... I get why people skip leg day. It's beyond just like the pain or the muscle aspect of it. You guys see this poster behind me, right? The chakra poster. I believe very much in that. I believe very strongly in the idea that people carry trauma in their body. One of the most devastating things that I think a person can do for their own consciousness and for their own self is to believe that they are just a brain and that their body is just sort of like a meat vessel that could more or less be ignored. I think that that's just a devastating way to look at yourself, because your body, the sections of your body are just as important as your brain. Like if you don't have a heart, you die, right? If you don't have intestines, you die. Right? If you can't take a shit, you die. So the idea that we are exclusively and only a brain that is being carted around in this like meat package that we can ignore, I just reject it. I completely reject it. And your body, and the more we study the body, the more we see that this is true. That we have like gut bacteria in our stomach that is as important to our intellectual decision-making pattern as our neurons. And and so the body can store trauma and can store energy within it. And you'll notice in the chakra system, in that idea, energy begins at the root, the very base of it, and it's about stability. You want to have stability. And so doing squats and doing leg day is like intentionally destabilizing yourself, like psychologically or like spiritually or existentially, however the fuck you want to say it. Your energy gets disrupted. And so that's how I felt this whole time. I feel very destabilized and very just like, whoa, 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 like, I don't even know what's going on. Okay, Goth Gash over on Twitch again. So, I don't assume your position. You've clarified your position. I'm just asking you, because you seem to think that there is a historical, context for Israel to exist in the region, and I'm simply asking you, what is that historical context? What is the historical argument for Israel's presence in the Middle East? Why should it be there? I'm not assuming anything. I'm just asking you. Transylvanian writes, there is such a thing as a Palestinian Jew, and they get treated just as humanely by the Zionists as Palestinian Muslims and Christians. It's not about religion. It's about colonialism. Yeah. Palestinian Jews lived in Palestine peacefully alongside Muslims and Christians for hundreds of years, before the Zionist settlers came to steal the land and establish a genocidal colonial entity. Just facts. Facts. Nilo writes, biological determinism is the primary mode of practitioners these days, it seems. I'm not sure I completely understand what you mean when you say biological determinism, so I don't want to really comment on it. I just think that, I have noticed that most people just believe, like, we're essentially a brain in a jar, and that the jar is your body. And, you got to keep the jar clean, I guess, but you don't really need to think about the jar. That it's all about the brain. It's all about the brain. So, Goth Gash answers, "Oh, I understand. I don't think that the historical context gives them land rights. I was just not understanding what you had said. I thought you were saying there was no history of them in the area." Oh, okay. Like they've been colonizing the area since like the 30s, maybe even a little bit before that. And like it was talked about before that. We literally have like people in the Ottoman Empire talking about the colonial project. But that's all it's ever been, right? Like that's all it's ever been. It's always just been a colonial project by colonial powers in order to colonize the Middle East, to create a military base there. That's all Israel is. It's a military base set up by the American Empire and the British Empire in order to give them a foothold in the Middle East, to essentially terrorize the Middle East and Africa by having a lily pad that they can jump off of. And yeah, XD writes, Zionism is a branch of white supremacy. I mean, Zionism is Zionism, Manifest Destiny, the Lebensraum, right? Like, these are all the same idea. Like, the idea is that there is a superior race, and that superior race requires an inferior race to commit atrocities against. For the Americans, it was the First Nations people and then the black population, which is why America finds it so frustrating that black people are being, or minority groups are being, like, normalized in America. I think that's very frustrating for huge sections of America. This is why there's this big outspokenness against wokeism, right? The big threat today is wokeism. And what is wokeism a threat to? The concept of manifest destiny and white supremacy. That America is supposed to be a white race, and allowing black people or Latino people, or Japanese people or Chinese people, Korean people, allowing them into the culture to sully it, right, is an affront, right? That's why we've got to fight wokeism. And, like, the Nazis actually wrote outright about, they took a lot of their policies regarding the Jews from the American segregationists. And they actually criticized the segregationists for being too extreme. Like, the Nazis said that of the American segregationists. So, and then Zionism is just explicitly Nazism. It's the exact same ideology. So it's just like Western civilization has this real taint to it, and near as I can tell, it always has, right? It always has had this taint to it, this extremist, this purity fetish, right? And when it was just the European powers fighting one another, they still had that purity fetish, right? It was just based on nationalist interests almost exclusively, right? And that's why Europe was constantly fighting wars with itself. And that's just been adopted by America because, I mean, they committed a genocide and slavery and the whole thing. And now it's been transferred over to the Zionists. Oh, it's beyond a convenient location, Gothgash. Gothgash writes, it's a very convenient location. No, it's beyond convenient. It's extremely useful for the American Empire. Like, for those of you who are just listening at home, I'm going to bring up a map, as I often do, and we're just going to take a look at it. Like, look at this. It's perfect. I don't think you could find a better strategic place for this to happen. It's right at the end of the Mediterranean Sea. So if Europe or America, for that matter, wants to get anything right into the heart of the Middle East, you just need to float some boats, right? Float some boats right over here, drop it into Israel. And then on top of that, if they got anything coming from the south, they can just bring it up through the Red Sea and just bring it up through the Gulf of Aqaba, right? Boom, you're right into Israel. So it's perfectly located. The only issue that's going on with Israel is that there isn't a corridor. The Suez Canal allows boats to travel to avoid the Horn of Africa, right? So you can get a boat coming here and just pops through here, right? Goes straight up to Europe or continues on to America straight through here, and it doesn't need to go all the way around the Horn of Africa, right? Which is huge landmass. It's actually way bigger than it appears on this map. There is actually a plan that has been on the table for a long time in Israel called the Ben Gurion Canal, where they want to part of the reason why I think they are doing this genocide is so that they can do a canal that cuts all the way through Israel and then connects with the Dead Sea and connects with this the river, right, that goes down to the Gulf of Aqaba, so that they can actually get a canal system going on to subvert and go around the Suez Canal. So that, and then of course I think their goal is to destroy the Suez Canal. The and like when you look at this, right, like Israel being right here completely cuts Egypt off from Saudi Arabia. Egypt and Saudi Arabia can no longer do any trade. They can no longer really facilitate anything with one another without doing it via ports or with Israel's permission. And certainly like Syria can't deal really successfully. Turkey, right? They can get stuff through the Mediterranean, but like Iran, right? Iran's got to go all the way around here, right? Afghanistan. Like, this creates huge problems for people, for Middle Eastern governments and for African governments. It literally drives a wedge between them. It literally drives a wedge between them. That Africa is essentially forced into a position where it has to organize with itself, and the Middle East is forced into a position where it has to organize with itself, because they can't really get a good organization going because they've got this thorn driven right between them in Israel. So it's beyond convenient, right? It's extreme. They could not have chosen a better location. In terms of fucking with world politics, and in terms of getting involved in Middle Eastern and African struggles. It's a total lily pad. It allows the Americans to basically just have huge amounts of weaponry, arms, and everything here. So if they want to invade Iraq, let's say, if they want to do invasions all through here, the Syrian war, Israel plays a huge part in the Syrian war, right? When the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood happened in 2008, Israel plays a huge part of suppressing the Muslim Brotherhood in Africa. The execution of Libya, the execution of Gaddafi, the murder of Gaddafi in Libya in 2006. The Israelis were completely tied up in that, right? So this is 100% a military base that has been positioned in order to interfere in politics around the location. Nilo, I really don't know if I understand what you're saying. Physicalism is also something of a problem, in my honest opinion. It's totally off everyone's radar, not just primarily, but exclusively. The mind-soul-body paradigm recast as the body-body-body paradigm. Like, I fundamentally believe that it is the body paradigm, that we only use the concept of mind, soul, and body to kind of come to terms or understand what it is we're talking about. That our behavior and personality and consciousness and this kind of thing is primarily a biological, material, physical thing, and that the immaterial and spiritual explanations are irrelevant or harmful. Yeah, I mean, I tend to see it. I am a materialist, right? I tend to see it all. It is all material, right? That there isn't like this secondary thing going on outside of our outside of our reality. That maybe we can't perceive it, right? If there was like another dimension layered upon our dimension, if there was like a fifth or a sixth dimension that we couldn't perceive, that doesn't mean that it's suddenly non-material. You understand what I mean? That it's that just because we don't perceive something because it exists outside of our awareness or our capacity or our ability to measure it, because we exist as third dimensional beings and there are fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh or eighth or ninth or 10th dimensions that we can't perceive, just in the same way that a 2D being couldn't really perceive a three-dimensional being. So where I get kind of... I respect and I understand why the kind of the concept of the soul, for example, comes up into this conversation, right? The concept of like a spirit, right? I get why people use that language, because there is something ephemeral going on. There's something a little bit like trying to describe something like that as a materialist thing just feels like it doesn't quite reach it. Eric, good to see you. Yeah, I'll listen to a crazy story from you, Eric. Hope you're doing well. This is where the where does everything come from question becomes relevant. Because everything is material. And why the question of what is nothing important. We can't possibly understand what nothing is. We have no... There's just... I think that humanity would be better off abandoning that one. I don't think that we... I don't think that we could ever... I don't think we could ever come to terms with it. Like, maybe we could create a model, or maybe we could create an idea or an abstract concept of it. And we kind of do that. Like, we kind of have an idea of what nothing is, right? Like, we understand the difference of, like, a box that's full of water and a box that's not full of anything, right? And we say that that's nothing, but that isn't actually nothing, right? That there is actually still something in that box. We just don't perceive it, and there's all this kind of stuff. But we just don't... we just don't... We can't possibly understand what that is. Like, we can't possibly understand what the concept of nothingness actually is. Because we're the opposite of nothingness. We are very distinctly not nothing. We are very distinctly something. And that is, like, definitional to our existences. That we have something. We are something. And so for us to even see or contemplate or come to terms with the concept of nothingness, I just don't think we can. Like, maybe it's worth dwelling on it as like a meditation or something, but like from a just existence standpoint, it's just beyond our comprehension. DM writes, "Good evening, John. Now that France has chosen a leftist party to lead their country, is this enough to implement positive social changes, or are we dealing with another capital complicit party?" I mean, they're social democrats, right? That's what they are. And their theory of how to get things done is through electoralism. And the Social Democrats will view this as a success for them. I mean, ultimately, I think the answer is we'll see. But the truth is that the thing that is inspiring the politics shifting, the thing that inspires the politics shifting in the direction that it did is like the revolutionary energy that exists in the streets. Like, literally, does everybody forget that like a year ago Paris was on fire? Like that's how politics rolls in France. And there's a lot of I can't imagine what a far right rising to power in France would actually look like. Like I really have a hard time perceiving what that would actually look like, because I just don't think the populace would go along with it. Like I really don't. I think that the response from the French people would be violent. And so there's this big just looming we'll see. France has always been able to push their society more and more to the left, because the people of France fundamentally understand that social democracy or no, if you want to get anything done, you've got to burn some cars. They've always known this, right? So the people who are in power are not necessarily responding to like a philosophical idea of like, what do we want our country to look like? They're responding to people literally outside their door being like, do this or we burn your house down. Like, that's politics, baby. So and the French understand what's going on and they know how to do it. And they do it. But they've been doing it for a long time. They've been doing it for years now. And like, so I don't necessarily have confidence in the Social Democratic Party that's been elected in France. What I do have confidence is the French working class. And that the French working class gets it. They understand how to motivate politicians. And the evidence that I see in France, or the lesson rather that we should take from France, is that if you actually want to inspire capitalist systems to respond to the electorate, well, go burn some cars. Organize so many people that the police literally can't respond. Like, overwhelm the systems. That's how you actually move the needle. Because that's how the French actually did it. Right? And that the political system essentially said, hey, if we don't align ourselves to actually look out for the interests of the vast majority of people in France, and actually start passing legislation that actually says, hey, we can improve your quality of life, they're going to start burning our houses down. And that's a real serious thing. So the lesson from France is organize millions of people to be as disruptive as possible. It's the only thing capitalists will respond to. Nilo writes, my fulcrum ultimately is when we die, do we become a less material part of the material and are reborn through matter recycling, or do we return to the potential of nothing and reemerge or not? Creato ex nihilo. I'm mispronouncing that. Creation out of nothing. No, I mean, I don't think we're special enough to return to nothing. Like, a single human individual is not special enough to return to nothing. Right? That we exist within a projection already. And we don't understand what is projecting or how that projection works, but we exist within a projection. So when we die, we just return to the projection. And we're cycled within the projection. We're nowhere near important enough to go all the way down to the base level of of the projector and to interact with that at all. Not even remotely close. So, I mean, maybe once every 500 billion years, one single life form of some sort would attain some kind of specialness to be able to make that kind of journey. Well, what's nirvana? So nirvana does not exist. Well, what do you mean by nirvana? In your conception of what the universe looks like, what is nirvana? Transylvanian writes, the French parliament is very split, and the leftist coalition is a very contradictory formation that could easily split apart. Yeah, and I think it only really came into being because of its fear of the right. Right? Like, it really was, and more specifically, I think it really only came into being because they understood that the French populace was not just going to be like, oh, the French, the right wing won. Oh, well, everybody, time to go home. Let's go home, everybody, and just wait another 4 years to have an election. That's not how the French were gonna be. That's not how the French were gonna do. Right? They're just not gonna do that. And like, if I'm a French politician on the left, looking at a different French politician who's like slightly different than me, I'm like, we could probably prevent these riots, you know. Because that's what they're looking at. Like, that's the seriousness of the situation in France. Like, if the right wing comes into power in France, there are riots. Enormous, huge, mass-scale riots. For sure. Just simply by the fact that they're elected. And, like, the French political class is likely sitting there being like, I don't want to deal with that. Not looking forward to that. Not looking forward to a bunch of hooligans showing up at my house, harassing me for being weak. Right? I'd like to prevent all of that. Like, I think the thing that I'm really driving at in terms of, like, why the French political system consistently moves itself to the left is because the political class actually has skin in the game in a real way. That it is actually personal. They can't just be these aloof, detached people because 1,000 people show up at their door with torches. Like, politicians should be afraid. They should be constantly scared, right? And I think the result that you saw in France is a result of that. That the French political system is just like, nah, we cannot allow the right wing to win. We know exactly what that's going to result in. We know exactly what's going to happen in France if we do that, right? Especially when we have the opportunity to not let it happen, right? Because the workers are sitting there being like, don't let that happen. What are you doing? Make a coalition. What are you doing? Make a coalition. Light a Molotov cocktail. Make a coalition. Like, yeah, well, this is always the case, Transylvanian. If you take a look at Western politics generally, the far right actually got more votes than the ragtag left coalition. They just got less seats due to the way the electoral system works. Yeah, that's usually how it goes. This is not a good sign, and if the left fails to provide a real alternative to the neoliberal center, the right will come back even stronger the next time around. But I think the difference there is that now that this coalition has formed up, now the populists can say, oh, this works. This actually was a thing. So now there's something to support, right? Now they can actually point at it and be like, hey, look at the thing that we did. And honestly, if they really want to convince the working class, if they really want to convince the workers that they're actually interested in doing this and they're actually moving forward, if they actually want to convince people, pass some fucking legislation. Make university free. Like, stop fucking around with us, right? Stop dicking around with this idea that you can't do these things. You obviously can, so do them. And stop fussing about with it. Pass the legislation. Shut up. Like, I'm so sick and tired of these politicians pretending like they're powerless, right? Like, absolute, and it's so frustrating to watch here in Canada. Like, it's so frustrating to watch that, like, whenever the left takes any amount of power, they're immediately like, well, you know, we gotta make sure that we fucking do things. Nationalize the banks. Shut up about it. Yeah, they're gonna complain. Let them. Revel in it. Allow them to complain. They've got free speech after all, and then nationalize the banks. Like, I'm sorry, but the reality is that Canadian citizens are so like nationalizing the banks, but they earned that. They earned the banks. Yeah, because we're too dim-witted to understand what's actually going on around us. So it won't be until the populace actually takes on a revolutionary quality that the systems will respond to us at all. And you can see that in France. Nilo writes, Nirvana is the breaking from the cycle of endless rebirth. I mean, we don't really have much by way of evidence to show that, like we don't really understand how something like reincarnation would work in the first place. We don't really get it or understand it. Nor do we really understand how the process of breaking from that cycle of rebirth would even look like. So, like, to me, I sort of hear about that kind of concept and think, like, that's so outside of our control. Like, it's so well outside of our capacity to even begin to control it. And I feel like the people who get the most lost in that concept are the people who think they do know. Long Defiant writes, there are some true leftist parties in France, at least. I mean, how could there not be? How could there not be? Okay, guys, I'm going to close this one down a half hour early. My voice is kind of going, and I'm just exhausted. Thank you, each and every one of you, for being here. Thanks so much. Always remember, guys, each and every one of you is a quantum being, walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Good luck. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.